So to do this exercise, we're going to open a new document. We're going to use a letter size and portrait. Okay. And we're going to drag this sketch that we've downloaded onto this letter size. And essentially, we are going to recreate this in Illustrator by using simple tools. And this is a basic diagram, something typical that you would probably do in architecture school. So there's a couple of things we need to do. Well, firstly, when we click on this object, we see that it is a linked file. And what we want to do is to convert that from a linked file and embed it. Now, what a linked file is, it's actually telling Illustrator that this file is located in wherever you downloaded the file to. And if you remove it or you transport that Illustrator file without taking that linked file with it, it will tell you that the file is missing. Now, to counteract that, if we look at the options available for this object that we've selected, we see where we can embed this file. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to embed it. And once we do that, notice that the name changes to an image from an embedded file. So that's great. Now the image is embedded in your Illustrator file. Now, before we get tracing, we want to set up ourselves. So the first thing we want to do is to create a, let's call this a source layer. And we are going to look into the options available to us, and we see up top on our options bar for this object that we can change the opacity. So we're going to change the opacity to about 30%. And then we are going to lock the layer because we're going to be tracing it. So we're going to lock the layer so that the object doesn't shift. Alright, great. Now we can't select or move the object. Now we are going to now create a new layer, and this new layer will be our trace layer that we're going to use to reproduce this sketch digitally. So we choose new layer, and let's call this layer trace. Now let's take a look on this. How would we approach this? Well, conceptually, we could use the pen tool and trace this out. Illustrator has the ability to do arrows, so we're going to use the arrows in Illustrator to get this done. We're going to use the arrows for this as well. And we are going to investigate how we can fill inside here with a pattern. This would be the pen tool that looks like waves. So let's get going. So using the pen tool, we're going to create this shape. Now before we start creating, we might want to set up our stroke and fill. So for the fill, we want it to be nothing, and for the stroke, black will do. So we're going to double click we're going to click on the fill and choose none, right? Remember, the none is right here. And we're going to double click on the stroke, and we're going to choose, let's choose black. Double click that and choose black. Okay. Oh. Now we can remember that we can also choose the stroke here. So we're going to choose black, and then we can start tracing. Now we just need to click, and this should be pretty straightforward. Now we're going to close it up. Then we're going to revise it. So we're going to use our selection tool and select the object, and we might want to make the stroke much thicker. So if you remember how this works, once you have the object selected, these are the options available to you based on the object that you have selected, and this is the name of what you have selected. So with this selected, we are going to look on the stroke, and we are going to change that to maybe 10. So we're going to go down with it about that. Now we haven't really investigated our detail tools, but let's take a look at what we have here. If you notice, these points are looking quite sharp, and these kind of details is something we would edit using our panels. Now if we remember, these are our standard tools, and these are panels on the right, and there is actually a panel that deals with strokes. So if I go to Window and go to Stroke Panel, or I could really just click on this object here and go to my Strokes panel there, and I can, for example, choose rounded edges, rounded corners like that. So notice that my corners are now rounded, which I think works better in this case. Now, what about arrows? Well, using the pen tool, we could draw a line. So let's create a new layer and call it arrows. And we're going to draw a single line like that, and press escape. Now we want to turn this line into an arrow. So firstly, let's use our selection tool, click on this object. Let's change the thickness. It's a bit too thick. Then we're going to look on stroke, and we see here that we have arrow types here. So we're going to change our arrow type to maybe that, or maybe this. Now we can use the swap arrow directions to swap it that way. And pretty much we have an arrow. Now to copy, we could use the traditional Control C and Control V. Control V and Control V. If I wanted to angle them, remember this is a line, so I could use my direct selection tool, which would allow me to select the points that make up the shape, and I could now angle them. And what about this arrow? Well, this is a curve, so we would use our pen tool, and we would use the revise it method. So we would draw it as a angle first. So we would go there, and then we would go there, press escape. Then we would want to convert this corner into a curve by selecting it. Remember, anytime we select an object, the options bar will tell us the options that is available to that object that we have selected, and this section here will tell us what we have selected. So let's do that. So we're going to use the direct selection tool, which enables us to now select anchor points, and then we're gonna use the convert icon here like that. Now this allows us to change it to a curve, which we can adjust, and then we use our selection tool to select. When we select this object, we look on our options bar. Under stroke, we're able to now select these arrows here, and on the other end we select these arrows here. Now of course these arrows are much bigger, so believe it or not, Illustrator has the ability to select the size of your arrowheads. So we're going to increase the size of this arrow, and we are going to increase the size of this arrow even bigger. There we go. Let's increase the thickness of the line, and let's decrease this arrow. It's a bit too big, and decrease this arrow. There we go. Maybe we can even change the type of arrow. Oh, that's about it. That should do it. So that's what we have so far. Now for this section here, this is a dash line. So we use our pen tool once more, and we can create this line. Go to our selection tool, select the line, and in our options bar we can change it to an arrow. Let's change this end to an arrow, and let's flip that, and we want to have it as a dashed line, so we want to choose dash line there, and we can adjust the thickness of the dash. We can even adjust the space between the dash by increasing the space. So the way how this works is that this is the size of the dash and this is the size of the space. We can also change the thickness of the line a little bit thinner, and change the size of the arrow. Now you get used to this after a while, so after you've done it a couple times you'll get used to it. And let's talk about fill. So far we've filled with color. However, we can fill with gradients, patterns, even images. Now, of course, if you remember how our concept works, that this side is really our general tools, and our more specific tools are found on the window in the form of panels. So far I've been using the layers panel to deal with my layers. Now what we're going to do is go for the Swatches panel. So we're going to click Swatches. I'm going to pull that out and close that. So this is my Swatches panel, and what this allows me to do, notice that it gives me the fill and stroke options, which is the same thing here. So that does the same thing. But additionally, it gives me some colors to fill. So I will now switch to my fill, and I could start giving the fill different colors that I see here. Now we don't want to give it a color, so we're going to leave that blank. More importantly, we want to access this little icon here, which is our library icon. Once we click that, we now can choose from a myriad of different types of fill based on a library preset. So I am going to choose, let's put this here, patterns, and I'm going to choose graphic lines. Now these are some patterns that are actually pre-made into Illustrator. Let's look on some more patterns. We have decorative cut patterns, we have nature patterns, so there are quite a bit. So I'm going to choose a pattern for my fill rather than a color, and that's how we do it, by choosing it from the library. So that's pretty cool. Now the other objects are pretty straightforward. This is a line, so we can use the pen tool to get this by clicking. And this time around I could probably click and then click and drag to get a curve. Click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. So this might be a little funny, but you can try it a couple times. I'm doing a fill, so I'm gonna say no fill, only stroke, and I'm gonna click on my object and decrease the value of my stroke. Now this doesn't really look like this, but this is a very organic line, so I'll leave you to figure out how to do that. Now the rest of this is pretty straightforward, so I want you to go ahead and finish this diagram in Illustrator. You're going to submit this file to me as a PDF this time around. So that's our tutorial on using Illustrator, and I wish you good luck with your exercise and that you will enjoy working with paths and anchors.